how's it going today? I have a new video for you all about renting apartments in Boston. So I've got some tips for you, and I asked for advice from some of my students, and they gave me some advice. So shout out to David. I'm so thankful that you gave me this long list of things that you have learned about renting homes in Boston. Or not renting homes, actually renting apartments. All right, so I'm going to go through the tips, and I'm also going to teach you some new vocabulary. So I'll help you with the pronunciation of those words so you can communicate better about renting an apartment in Boston. Okay, let's talk about tips for your apartment search in Boston. Let's start by looking at some vocabulary just so that you have an easier understanding of what I'm going to be talking about today. Here are some of the key words. Tenant. A tenant is someone who signs a lease to rent an apartment. So you are the tenant. Lease. The lease is the contract that you sign to agree to a certain amount of months and payment to rent. Make sure that you read your lease very carefully. And sometimes you can ask for a translation of the lease in your native language. It never hurts to ask. A broker. Broker is someone who works to help find rentals or real estate property. So a broker is actually a job that someone has, and they will be the ones that you often contact through a website, and they will make the appointment for you to look at apartments. They will do a credit check on your credit history, which is one of the next words we have here. Credit history. The record of borrower's payment of debt. So this is something that we're going to talk a little bit more about. It's really, really important. And townhouse. So there's a little bit of confusion sometimes by what a townhouse means. This is a home usually with 3 floors that shares a wall on one side with another townhouse. So it's different than an apartment. An apartment is just 1 floor. It doesn't usually have 2 floors, although it depends on the building, but this could also be some confusion. So just make sure you know what a townhouse is. And then commute. This is the time and distance it takes you to get to school or work. So your commute is really important when you're looking for a property to rent in Boston. Okay, so let's practice the pronunciation of that vocabulary that we just learned about. The first one is tenant. Tenant. The next one is lease. Lease. And then broker. Broker. And after that, there's credit history. Credit history. And townhouse. Townhouse. And then the last one is commute. Commute. Okay, so first of all, Boston is an awesome city. It has so much to offer, but it is quite spendy. So this means that be aware, it's really expensive to rent an apartment here. It's one of the most expensive cities in the United States, but the city offers a lot. I mean, it's a great place to live. It has wonderful opportunities for universities, and that's why it's so popular. All right, so first of all, you need to make sure that you have credit history. So as soon as you get to the United States, you need to get a credit card. So I say get a credit card ASAP. ASAP means as soon as possible, ASAP. So credit history. So what does this mean exactly? Remember the definition of credit history is the amount of debt that you have as a borrower, and you have this history of paying off your debt. So my recommendation is to make a few purchases each month on that credit card, maybe 10% of your total purchases or something like that. So even just $50 a month is enough to show your credit history. And you need about 6 months of credit history in order to qualify for a rental, unless you have a co-signer. And a co-signer is someone who can sign for you, who can prove that they have a large amount of income in their bank account. So sometimes young people who just move into the city, they don't have enough credit history and they don't have enough income, so they will actually have their parents co-sign for them. Okay, so real estate broker fees and security deposits. So these are two really important parts about renting in Boston. Remember we talked about a broker? That's someone who works for a real estate company, and their job is actually to help you find apartments. So Boston has this something called broker fees, which is not found in all cities in the United States. I was kind of surprised actually when I moved here that they had these broker fees. So there are a couple things that you should know about broker fees. Broker fees can be quite expensive. They're usually between 5 to 10% of your total rent per month. So like if you had an apartment that was $2,000 a month, right? You would be paying about $2,400 or something, I think, per for your broker fees. So I'm going to put a couple of links in the description of this video, and you can find out more information about ways to avoid paying broker fees. For example, you could ask the landlord to pay for your broker fees. Sometimes there are landlords who are willing to pay for your broker fees because they really want you to move into their apartment building or something like that. Or sometimes they even have specials where you'll have a sign outside that says no broker fees. So anyway, just make sure you understand very clearly before you start working with someone how much you're going to have to pay. The other thing is a security deposit. So a security deposit is something that you have to pay so that the landlord knows that you're not going to destroy their apartment. So it's about making sure the apartment is not damaged, it's clean when you move out, and this is something that you will get back at the end of your lease. So this usually is about like $1,000, but it also can be just as much as your rent. So it depends on the apartment that you rent. Okay, another really great tip that some students have, of course, is to find an apartment that's close to campus. So, it's very cold in the wintertime here in Boston. You can see this picture is actually gorgeous. The weather looks wonderful. But in other parts of the year, it's going to be freezing. And sometimes you have to wait outside for a train. Get ready for winters in Boston. It's beautiful when it snows. It's very gorgeous, but it is difficult to walk very far, right? And also you should try to be close to the T. This is what we call the train system, the subway system in Boston is called the T. The closer you can be to the subway, the better. But of course, those apartments are going to be more expensive, right? Because everybody wants to be close to the T. So, just be aware of this. Really look closely at the map to figure out how far you are away from the university. So if you own a car, or you want to buy a car when you move to Boston, just really check into the parking situation in that apartment. I remember the first time we rented an apartment in Brookline, which is one of the neighborhoods of Boston. It was so funny to me because we had one parking spot and everybody was saying, oh my gosh, you don't have to pay extra for the parking spot. And I was like, no, doesn't parking just come with every apartment? Like, that to me was so crazy. But I'm not from the East, so I didn't understand that parking is a real premium here in Boston. So just be aware, commuting in Boston can be quite tricky depending on where you live. So just be aware of that and make sure to ask a lot of questions if you do plan to buy a car. If you enjoy walking and, taking like a bike ride or doing, some kind of running, the Charles River is gorgeous during many parts of the year. And you can see that there are sailboats here. And if you live close to the Charles River, you can go along the pathway along the river and do exercise on a regular basis. And also it's a great place to commute. If you have a bike, you can actually ride your bike along the Charles River. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the lease agreement. So this is the contract, like I was saying before, that you will sign between you, the tenant, and the landlord, right? The landlord is the one that owns the building. And make sure that you read this, obviously, very carefully before you sign it. make sure you understand what's included in the lease, right? So sometimes there's heat and water, sometimes there's Wi-Fi, internet connection. It just depends on the building. So there's lots of different things that you need to know about that lease agreement. Oftentimes they require the first and last month's rent up front. So you may, if you're renting an apartment that's $2,000 a month, you may be required to come up with $4,000 right away, in addition to the security deposit and the broker fee. Okay, roommates. Oh my gosh. If you're looking for a roommate, there are lots of different websites where you can find roommates. Ask around, ask other college students, but be aware that Americans do love to party, and, just make sure it's clear. Interview your roommate, ask them lots of questions, make sure that you really understand what their life is like, if they're a serious student or, depending on what your preferences are. Fenway, I've heard some of my students say that it's a great place to watch a baseball game, but it's quite noisy because of the games that go on there, and there are also lots of bars around there. So it's a great tourist attraction, but it depends on what you prefer. Do you like to be around a noisy stadium? It's close to many campuses, around Boston, but it just depends on what your preferences are. So there are some differences between renting a room in a house versus an apartment. So I have a student actually who recently rented a room in a house, and she found that it was quite difficult living with a family because the family didn't give her a lot of privacy. So, you often can find a much better deal renting a room in a house, but then you have to deal with, living with the family. So just be aware of that. Make sure to ask lots of questions, like I said before. And Boston neighborhood recommendations. So I'm going to put a link in the description of this video, and there will be some great information about different neighborhoods around Boston. So check the links below for some helpful websites. All right, that's all for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share my video with your friends.